Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Tazri, Stalwart Survivor, a 5-color level up deck. Do you remember Level Up? Level Up came out in Rise of the Eldrazi, and was attached to a bunch of creatures that would grow as you put mana into them. This was really nostalgic to me to see this because I started in Worldwake. So when these came out, I thought they were really cool. And I think we've only seen Hex Drinker since then with the level up mechanic. Very cool card, and all of these cards have such interesting mechanics. This deck is one of our donation decks for the week, and it comes from Banana Sensei, who says, "The concept of the deck is to use Tazri to more effectively level up your creatures. I wanted level up creatures to be the highlight of the deck, but as it is now, the deck is highly inconsistent. At times, it even performs worse than a precon. I would love if you could get the deck performing at a consistent 7 out of 10 if possible. I have some cards in the considering section for possible directions to take the deck." And in terms of budget, they say any individual card under $80 is fair game. I'm excited to see where you take the deck. Well, we're going to have a conversation about that 7 out of 10 in a moment, but before we do, we're going to take a momentary break and look at Tazri and what she does and what she brings to the deck. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Tazri Stalwart Survivor, and why is she our 5-color level up commander? So Tazri is interesting. She's one of those cards that has all of the colors in the activated ability or in her text box, even though she herself is just mono white. So for 3 mana, you get a 3/3 human warrior. And she has 2 abilities. The first one is each creature you control gains tap, add 1 mana of any of these creatures' colors, spend this mana only to activate an ability of a creature, activate only if this creature has another activated ability. That's a lot of text to say, if your creature has activated abilities, you can use this to activate the ability of another creature. And then a activated ability herself so that she can use her own ability. For 1 Wooburg, or 1 of each color, tap, mill 5 cards, put all creature cards with activated abilities that aren't mana abilities from among the milled cards into your hand. The name of the game is activated abilities, and obviously the synergy here is that level up are activated abilities, and they are sorcery speed activated abilities, so you can tap out on your turn to grow some of your creatures, so on your next turn they are stronger and more able to attack. Before we leave Tazri, I'd like to take a moment to point out that despite her being a 5-color commander, she will only tap for white mana. This isn't a big problem in a deck like this, but it is worth remembering. And her own activated ability is actually really strong, but kind of clunky to get going. Once you have it going and you have the ability to make all 5 colors, this is a pretty big draw spell in a deck like this, where, you know, we've got half the deck as creatures. They don't all have activated abilities, but a majority of them do, and therefore there's a very high chance of putting those cards into our hand. Alright, so let's talk about the deck. And let's talk about this concept of a 7 out of 10. Now, a 7 out of 10 deck, constantly memed on as being like what everyone thinks their deck power level is or should be, is pretty high when you think about it. 7 out of 10, that's a B, right? 80's B+, 90's up is A. What is a 7 out of 10? I think it has to be at least a B, right? This is a 7 out of deck is a deck that functions almost all of the time. Outside of opponents' interaction with you, outside of like really bad hands, 7 out of 10 times you do what you want to do. That's how I would look at it. That being said, that's a pretty high scale when you think about it. And so at a certain point, we have to be realistic about the capabilities of this deck. And I'm sure a lot of you may have seen this coming, but we do have the problem that level up creatures, by and large, are not very strong cards. I hate to say it, I know it's heartbreaking, I love these cards too, but they're weak. And that's not the worst thing, right? That's just reducing our power level. Consistency, as our deck builder pointed out, is not the same thing as power. right? Zulaport Enforcer is a fine creature when everyone's playing precons. The problem is that when Zulaport Enforcer is in your hand and you have nothing else to accelerate it, it is a 1/1 for 1, right? This level up cost is 4. 4 is a lot. That means you're paying 5 mana for a 3/3. And though it's really easy to relegate that into a power conversation, you can say, hey, Curse, that's fine. That's just low power. You know, I don't care about power. I care about consistency. Well, the problem is the power is so low that it interferes with your consistency. You know, Zulaport Enforcer, taking up 4 mana is taking up a turn you could be casting, they're not in here, but like Cultivate. You could be casting Harmonize. You could be casting a card that puts you ahead on resources to facilitate your other turns. However, instead, we're putting mana into Zulaport Enforcer in order to get a 3/3. Now, once again, there is the argument of, well, Cursed, you're looking at it wrong. Zulaport Enforcer is just a mana dork. You play him for 1 black, you put out Tazri, and all of a sudden he taps for mana for your other cards. It's not terrible. I don't disagree with that, but it's not great, because if you lose Tazri, your creature is back to being not particularly good. So, with that in mind, I'm saying all this not to say, shelve the deck, it's never going to work out. I would never say that. I don't think that's true at all, even. I think we just need to be a little more critical and realistic with what the deck can do. And the balancing act that needs to happen is that we need to consider what our options are and which of these level up creatures we want to play. A little while ago, probably a long while ago actually, I got a Chandra deck. It was a Chandra based, the whole idea was a Chandra deck. And when I looked at the Chandra deck, I made the argument that you should take out the weaker Chandras so you can focus on the stronger ones. I recently got a comment on that of someone saying, well, isn't the entire point of a Chandra deck to play all the Chandra cards? And this might be a discussion that happens ephemerally between me and Banana Sensei of, is that your definition of a level up deck? Do you just want to play every level up card? Because I'm going to suggest that that's going to get in the way of building a level up deck. Instead, if we were to focus on the stronger ones, we're looking at Student of Warfare, we're looking at Echo Mage, we're looking at not the Mystic Archaeologist, the Lighthouse Chronologist, very similar names. We're looking at these very, very strong ones. We're looking at where's our not Zulaport Enforcer, Guldraz Assassin, a repeatable removal spell that is attached to a 4/4 creature. Like, these are the ones that I want to be playing in my level up deck. And I do not want to be playing, the Balaged, where are you? I know you're in here somewhere. Beastbreaker of Balaged, a 2-mana 2/2 that with 3 mana becomes a 4/4. And then, what's that? Another 6 mana, so for 10 total mana, you get a 6/6 trample, right? Even with what we can do to cheat on these mana costs, we're going to be limited in how good these things can be. Now, going back to this deck, my suggestion is actually not going to be just take out the weaker level up creatures, because I don't want to do that. My suggestions are going to be more towards the structure of the deck, and I will leave it up to Banana Sensei to decide where they want to go. Because if the entire point of the deck is to keep every single level up creature, well, then my advice won't be very useful. So let's look at the rest of the structure of the deck and see what are some points that we can improve or work on. And I put some of these into the additions, but some of these I'm just going to talk about casually because they're more general ideas. And as Banana Sensei had said, they put a few cards here for ideas on which directions to take, and we might go over a few of them as well. So the first thing I want to point out really quickly, something I say a lot, so I want to skim it, is that when we talk about decks that want to be powerful or consistent, that their main creature based game plan isn't as strong as they'd like it to be, they often supplement it with immensely powerful non-creature cards. And we can see to an extent that's what's happening here. We can see we've got Rhystic Study and Smothering Tide. You can see that we're using Teferi's Protection, Flawless Maneuver, Heroic Intervention, Psych Rift, Slow Swords to Plowshares. Like, do you see, like, these cards are so powerful, but they're supporting a strategy that just doesn't need this level of power. You should not need Teferi's Protection in a deck like this, right? Like, it's just overkill. This is a card that you're going to be using as a pseudo counterspell on certain board clears, but like more just to protect you, or a pseudo fog. And I think that's probably pushing it, both in terms of sheer power level of a card, but also like budget and value for the deck, right? A deck like this will have a much more use out of just straight Cultivate than it ever would of Teferi's Protection. And that's something I feel like some people forget about, because like Teferi's Protection is an immensely powerful card. You hear all of these content creators talking about how good it is, and Cultivate is kind of from a bygone age at this point, in my opinion, outside of specific strategies. So it makes sense if I could play either of them. Why would I play the one that people rave about? People beg for a reprint. People are constantly thinking about which deck to put it in. But here, I'd rather Cultivate 100% of the time. Beyond these strong cards, something else, the first thing that kind of pops out at me is past, like, our curve and our lands are pretty good. We can come down here and see the mana production versus the symbols. This does kind of concern me. You can kind of see that a lot of our production is in the low 30s, outside of green, which is 46, white, which is the highest one at 50, and blue is kind of a 38 as the second highest. I still would like this to be higher. I think if we could play as many of the, you know, like straight multicolor cards, it would be better. But we've only got so many, right? And there's only so much we can do. And I don't know if I just want to suggest fetch lands and triomes in a deck like this. It feels a little overkill, but I wouldn't mind just a few triomes, if the cheaper ones, or tap tri-lands. Like, we're already playing, I can see here, I thought I saw it. We're already playing a few tap lands, aren't we? Maybe, sorry, maybe I'm confused. I guess we're not. Okay. Then at this point, if we're going to make this stronger, it's fetch lands, but that's kind of talking about the same thing before, where we're putting fetches and shocks and triomes in a deck that can't support it with its own power, so that feels a bit weird. But I mean, if you want that consistent mana base, I get that. But I'm going to suggest something else, actually. Let's look at red and black. Notice that red is at 6% and black is at 9%. We look into here, and then we can quickly look at how many different cards outside, like let's even ignore our level up creatures. Let's look what we have in red and black in our non-creature collection. And we have 2 black cards, Assassin's Trophy and Anguish Unmaking. Both of these cards could be very easily replaced by white variants. You could have Path to Exile, you could have a Stroke of Midnight, you could you already have Generous Gift, but you could play, heck, Disenchant, you could play Nature's Claim, right? You have a lot of non-black options that will make the mana a little softer on your end. And then when we look at our black level up creatures, we have Nirkana Cutthroat, which is a big Death Touch first strike creature that when you pump enough mana is impossible to block figuratively, in a good way, my goodness. Null Champion is just a beater that comes with Regenerate. Let's see, Zulaport Enforcer is also just a beater. And would you look at that, all that's left is Goldraz Assassin. Once again, I'm not going to tell you to cut all of these, but if I were building this deck around level up, I would cut all of them except for Goldraz Assassin. Now the downside, of course, is that then this becomes very parasitic. This is a card that that is black to play, takes black to level up, and black for the ability, whereas you have a low amount of black in your deck. That being said, through Birds of Paradise and other such things, you should be able to get that black mana. And there's a few other tricks like you have already of putting level up counters. So it's not terrible, but it would take a lot of pressure off the deck. Likewise, if we look at the red ones, we have Lord of Shatterskull Pass, who has a really, really cool level 6, but up until that is just a beater. We've got Brimstone Mage, which can bolt an opponent each turn. I really like this card, especially because cheating on the level up is a very reasonable thing to do and doesn't need red mana for the ability. And then we have the Dragon Lord, which just turns into a dragon, which has an immense requirement of red mana, both being red, and each level up being red. One of these, there's two versions of level up. There's the ones like Zulaport Enforcer, where it's expensive but low on colors, and you do it like a few times. Or there's things like Kargan Dragon Lord, which it is cheap on mana, but expensive on colors, and you have to do it a bunch of times. If you asked me, I would also cut the majority of the red. Don't get me wrong, Goro Goro is super sick. I wouldn't get rid of Goro Goro. But the level up creatures could be sliced down, and all of a sudden, we're in Bant, our mana can be easier, we can have a better time generally, like not worrying so much about getting all of our colors. And you can even see in our considering section, there's very little, there's one black card, and the red card is actually a white card. So I don't know, that's the first kind of thing I'm noticing. Going to pick on a few cards in particular. Austere Command feels overpaying for a Wrath in a deck that you have access to all colors. If, despite what I said about red, if you wanted to keep red as a main color, you could, or even just make it easier to get that red, Blasphemous Act exists. Toxic Deluge in black, likewise, a color you might want to remove. But otherwise, we could use, 4 mana Wrath of God. We could use Farewell. We could use, even Farewell, I don't think I'd want to play. These are just, Austere Command is just a little clunky and too much mana when you could be playing something else. Whereas Damning Verdict at least has a fun little mechanic on it that you can take advantage of. Let's see. I just want to take a moment that the Ozolith is genius here, and I really, really like it, as you can replay level up counters that you can take off of one creature onto another. 10 out of 10. Absolutely love. Looking at a few of the creatures otherwise, once again, I'm trying to not pick on the level up creatures. Azure Mage and Spectral Sailor. These are both creatures whose payoff are drawing a card in exchange for being substandard creatures themselves. Now, I get this idea because you can tap it and 3 other creatures without Summoning Sickness to pay for... Actually, can we even do that? Yes, a creature, not another creature. Okay, thank goodness. So we could tap it and 3 other creatures to draw a card. That feels like a lot of work. That feels like I'd much rather this just be divination most of the time. I get that it works in theme, but you are playing 2 1s for 2 with the ability to draw a card. So 6 mana to draw that first card, 8 plus another 10. That's 10 mana to draw 2 cards while keeping not the best body. 12. So when does that pay off? I don't know. At 18 mana to draw 3, yeah, I don't think that ever pays off. The ceiling of these cards are quite high, with Training Grounds in play, tapping creatures down, but as just creatures on the battlefield, I think a lot of the time you'd rather them just be draw cards, so I think I'd rather that be the case. Canker Bloom, likewise, I don't particularly, the Proliferate is cute on it, but the fact that it sacrifices, this is 3 mana to proliferate, whereas instead we could use Thirsting Roots for 1 mana, find a basic, proliferate, right? If this is the main idea here, I think we could do better. It works on theme, I get that it works on theme, but it is clunky. It is slow, whereas you'd rather just get the proliferate when you want it, and the other modes are basically just better covered by your immensely powerful instants and sorceries, right? Anything else here that jumps out at me? Skydiver, I believe we could probably get Proliferate at a cheaper cost, but I think it's fine. Mystic Archaeologist, I like this a lot more than the Azure Mage, so I would keep this over that. But once again, this feels like, if this was the only one of this ability, I think it's fine, because 7 mana for 2 cards, 12 mana for 4 cards, that seems a lot more reasonable. 19 mana for 6 cards, I think that's fine. And if you reduce this in any way, then it gets really, really good. So I do like Mystic Archaeologist, but the rest of those, I don't know if I would play. Lizelle feels weak because she is depending on you to have the rest of your deck functioning. This is very win more and doesn't even work with your commander, as your commander doesn't put +1/+1 counters. Whereas you already have, oh, where'd they go? There we go. Shalai, who works better with +1/+1 counters by herself, of just being a mana sink and having a really cool ability. Lizelle feels just, I hope Lizelle, I hope that's correct, seems to be just kind of okay. All right, those are kind of a few of the cards that I think I want to kind of touch on before we go into additions and ideas. Yeah. I do want to note, there's just like a lot of powerful cards you could be putting into this. Like, I'm going to give a lot of additions, I think like at least 10, I hope. But something I think that's just worth considering is no matter what happens, I think you're just going to have to answer that question at the start. Which level up creatures do you want to play? Get a handful of the ones you want to play. Make it even that you want to like pick one from each color even. Like, I'm looking at this, like, Enclave Cryptologist is a really, really good card, like, much better, I think, than Azure Mage, dramatically, because for 3 mana, you can just tap and loot, and then by incidental level ups, you can just tap and draw. That's one. Black, green, and then, where are we at? White can be Student of Warper. I mean, you could even just take the low mana ones and then grab the Brimstone Mage. Like, already those 5 I love. And then pick a handful more and then build a deck that tutors these cards and ensures that you get them every time. And then we can get huge amounts of support. Like, for all of these cards, you could play Ranger Captain of Eos, which would tutor any number of these 1 mana level up creatures directly into your hand while being a creature with an activated ability and an incredibly powerful activated ability, you know, in essence. So that taps for mana for these abilities, it works really well. So like, that would be a way of powering up the deck. Maybe I should just stop. Let's just look at it. Let's just talk about Ranger Captain. If you want to continue the direction of putting powerful cards in order to support this deck and raise the power level and the consistency, you're going to want tutors and you're going to want a lower amount of creatures, especially a lower amount of level up creatures to find the right ones. Okay, let's move on and let's see the other things that I have suggested, and maybe we'll come back to Ranger Captain at the end for... Actually, we'll have something even more ridiculous to come back to at the end to consider. All right. So Aki Battle Squad. I wanted to start here because Modified immediately made me think of this. In the cards that are being considered, where are you? We've got Kodama of the West Tree, which I think is a really, really good addition that gives your modified creatures you control have trample. And then every time a modified creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to tutor for a land, a basic onto the battlefield tapped. Now, we don't have that many basics, but we definitely have enough that I think it is going to pay off. At least after 1 attack. But when it comes to attacks, combat, and modified creatures, Aki Battle Squad I always think is a really, really nice top end to a deck like this. You slam it, you have an attack, and then you have a second attack. There is something that's also really worth noting, is that this untaps creatures that are modified regardless if they have attacked. So if you want to use something like this, works really well with, for example, our Brimstone Mage, which you can use to, you know, bolt down a creature. You attack with a different modified creature, and then that will still untap, Aki Battle Squad will still untap the Brimstone Mage, allowing you to bolt down a second creature. So I think that's rather strong, and so either in combat or non-combat, you're going to find a lot of uses for this card. Also, when this is in tandem of the Lighthouse Chronologist, you are getting 4 combats over 2 turns, and that's pretty ridiculous, I will say. So big fan of this card. Not exactly modified, but very close. I always think of Kudzil in these kind of decks. Mainly, this first silence effect that exists on your turn is very, very strong for a deck like this. All you're leveling up is sorcery speed. I haven't talked about this, but there are reasons why we don't see level up creatures anymore, right? And the most dramatic one is that level up being sorcery, it enables your opponents to basically burn out, like destroy your creatures in response to a level up, spending a ton of your mana for nothing, basically. This is also what stops like Outlast as a mechanic. If Outlast was instant speed, if level up was instant speed, they'd just be dramatically better, but unfortunately, they are not. I think with this out, you'll be a lot more protected, but honestly, it's just a strong card. Now, this isn't modified, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how it works with level up creatures. Like, what is the base power and toughness? My understanding is it's what's in this box, and as this creature levels up, its base power and toughness change to a new base. So with that in mind, I actually don't think you draw unless you put a +1/+1 counter on it, but I could be wrong. Someone smarter than me would know for sure. But considering that you have the ability to put +1/+1 counters and have equipment, I think it's still worth it. And honestly, I think it's worth it for that first ability. Zirda. Zirda is an interesting card in a deck like this. I think it's really, really tempting to make Zirda the companion. I think you can if you like. I don't think I'd be against it. I think you would lose enchantments, right? You would lose the Ozolith, you would lose Rhystic Study, you lose Time for Heroes. I think our non-creature permanents we'd lose a lot. We'd lose Training Grounds, we'd keep Resourceful Defense, we'd lose, yeah, those strong ones, and then in artifacts, keep Shadow Spear, keep Soul Ring, lose the Ozolith, keep Arcane Signet, keep Lantern. So it wouldn't be free, but it would be really powerful in certain builds. Remember what I said earlier, and once again, this is probably more for people who aren't the deck builder, who are maybe less knowledgeable on Level Up. Level Up has those two varieties, ones that are very high in colorless mana and ones that are very low in colored mana. This only helps the Zulaport Enforcers. It doesn't help the assassin, the Gul'Draz assassin. I gotta remember these names. It doesn't even help Hexdrinker, who has a very low colorless ability, but cannot be rendered lower than 1. So Zirda can be really, really strong as a companion, but there's a cost to them. That being said, you can just play Zirda in the main deck, and I think that's fair to do. There is the infinite combo you can do with Basalt Monolith, and Grim Monolith if you're made of money, where you can tap and untap them, making infinite colorless mana, filter it through something, and for infinite colored mana. I don't think this is where the deck wants to be, but it is an option. Zirda themselves, are they all mothers? Someone told me that they're all mothers, so they're all female, but I don't actually know this. But Zirda themselves is strong enough, I would say, just in the 99, and the tangential way it works with a few of your permanents for free, I think is going to be worth playing it, so I think it's an easy addition. Oops. Harmonize. I want to talk about card draw. The fact that the card draw on our commander is really, really good, but it is a luck-based ability. It is dependent on you having 5 mana, and you need her to be not summoning sick. That's a lot of things to be hoping for, especially because that mana cost is the same as a Zulaport Enforcer activation almost. I'm not going to get over that. It's a lot. It actually, because it's 6 mana if you consider that Tazri, yeah, it's worse. It's 6 mana because you have to tap down Tazri, who herself represents another mana. So it's 6 mana to draw maybe 3 cards, hopefully 4. So I would just like some cards that just draw. And Harmonize is the most accessible one, I think, in this current build. Otherwise, it would be... What is Harmonize color shifted from? Let's find out. Blue, 4 mana... Oops. 4 mana, draw 3. been such a long time. I'm pretty sure Jace is on it. But either of these cards I would play. Why did I not get 4 mana? Oh, that's what happened. Either of these cards I think would be very good because they represent immediate card draw. Immediately you can do something with it. Concentrate, perfect. You could just play Concentrate because I think you have more blue than green. You might end up with more green than blue in certain situations. Either way, just having a card that just draws cards is really, really nice. The other version of that I really like is Chart a Course, where it is a 2 mana just draw 2. This is akin to like Sign in Blood and the like. 2 mana draw 2s are very nice. They're low to the ground. They feel pretty good. And here the only cost for it is that you have to have attacked, which is reasonable in this deck. And even if you don't attack, all you do is discard a card, which you might be able to get away with late game anyways. So this is a nice card that I think would support at low mana. One that I felt worth bringing up, because I brought it up recently, is Assemble the Players. In a level up deck, the majority of your creatures are 2 power or less before they level up, and therefore having this card that casts spells off the top of your deck with almost half of your deck being creatures and a majority of them being 2 power or less, this can be played pretty easily. Is it good? It's fine. I think it'll help in consistency because a spell that's cast off the top is card draw and the spell. I think I said last time I suggested this is if you could get 2 to 3 creatures off of this, I think you're pretty happy. Any more than that, I think you're lucky. Any less than that, I think you're less happy. So Assemble the Players being 2 mana, draw 2 or 3, I think is probably enough for it to be good, and I think it could very easily do that in this deck. I want to talk about a few equipment cards because something I think could supplant the deck and support the deck is these kind of equipment that stick around even if your level up creatures die or are otherwise removed. Sword of the Animist and Bitter Thorn are basically the same card with some advantage on either side. Just being able to ramp. Once again, you don't have that many basics, but I think it'll be useful to get the first few out. Your basics enable you to get your Tazri activations much faster, and both of these creatures they work on attack and not damage, which I think is much, much stronger and kind of guarantee a little bit of acceleration in a deck that lacks acceleration. Mask of Memory is another one that I really like. I like this card's ability to draw and keep you going, especially after certain like board clears when you can establish your team back and get an attack in, or evasive creatures which you have both in unblockability and flying. Attach them together, I think that's pretty good. Get a card draw here and there and build your board up, I think is going to be nice. All right, let's talk about something dumb. This is what I've been waiting for. Agatha's Soul Cauldron. You give me a budget of $80, this is where I immediately wanted to spend it. Agatha's Soul Cauldron is really, really interesting in this deck because what it allows you to do is take better, how do I word this? Easier level up activations and attach them to cards that have harder times leveling up and only need to level up a few times. What do I mean by that? I mean you take Agatha's Soul Cauldron and you exile Hexdrinker, and then every single one of your level up creatures now levels up for 1 mana, right? And all of a sudden, we are no longer having that conversation about Zulaport Cutthroat, because Zulaport Cutthroat becomes a 4 mana 5/5 pseudo Intimidate, right? Oh no, it is Intimidate. Intimidate artifacts? Regardless. A 4 mana 5/5 is a lot better for this power level of the deck. And that's just Zulaport Enforcer. If we look at something like Lord of Shadowstone Pass, which gets halved in mana cost, becomes 10 mana for a 6/6 with a ridiculous ability. Nirkana Cutthroat becomes 6 mana for a very, very strong attacker, so on and so forth. There's a lot of these that I think, like even Null Champion, I think gets much, much better. All of them become instantly playable in a much more dramatic way. And that also lets you pass around some of these abilities. Now, here's the thing, right? How do we pass down these abilities? I actually don't know how that works. Man, why did I put this card in? Okay. This card has this ability when it's level 2 or 3. Does that mean that if you have a creature that's level 2 or 3, it has this ability if this is underneath the cauldron? Are copied. The current characteristics of the level and the number of levels on it are not. The power... its level changes accordingly. This doesn't say. This is interesting. It gains the activated abilities. It doesn't become a copy of it. I'm going to assume that you don't get the abilities of the card outside of level up or whatever natural abilities that it has. So there is a ceiling on this power. If someone can correct me and tell me if, because if you would get the other level up abilities that you would gain, so for example, if you would gain this ability down here, the -4/-4, if your creature was level 4 or higher, that would be really, really cool and make it really strong. As it is now, I think Agatha's Soul Cauldron really works in more of the beatdown version, where you're using cards like Hex Drinker to enable higher, like, beefier creatures to have an easier time leveling up, as opposed to the strongest level up creatures who have much, much harder times leveling up. You have to remember, this card was right before Scars. These cards came out and they knew Proliferate was coming out. So the really good ones purposely don't work really well with Proliferate, because each proliferation here is only 1 blue mana worth of ability, let's say. So yeah, I think if you wanted to play the Soul Cauldron, which I think is really, really silly, you could use it specifically to level up certain creatures in strange ways. You still have to put +1/+1 counters on them. This is honestly kind of a joke edition, I'm not gonna lie. I think it's a little too clunky, but I do see a certain build of this deck using this card. Likewise, I wanted to finish by looking through some of these creatures, and when I did earlier and I was thinking about what they do, I will note that this kind of direction, all of these cards are just, once again, either generally good cards, such as Mirari's Wake, which is just a generally good card and would be fine here, but they don't naturally work with our +1/+1 strategy, right? Like, +1/+1, my goodness, I'm sorry, our level up counter strategy. These are all interesting cards, but like, Thrasia's Trident Hero is immensely powerful in a Tazri deck, but maybe not so much in a level up Tazri deck, right? It doesn't work with our main strategy. And I think this is what I'll close on. This deck will have games where it wins by playing Rhystic Study and Smothering Tithe back to back. This deck will have games that it wins by just efficiently using its removal and bashing with whatever creature it has. Right now, the setup doesn't enable for the level up creatures to work well, because while you have, you know, Rhystic Study out, the cards you're drawing are Knight of Cliffhaven. When you have turns where you want to be setting up, you know, mana or artifacts or equipment, you're instead thinking, maybe I should be putting mana into Echo Mage to potentially use this, you know, instead on something else. Now, I think there's still a lot we can do. There's so many directions. I was even thinking Eldrazi Spawn or Eldrazi Scions as mana dorks because they have activated abilities and they therefore can tap and they're easy to mass produce. So you can mass produce them to level up your creatures and then get extra mana from sacrificing the Eldrazi Spawn to put even more mana into leveling up. Like, that's the directions I was going in. But all of these directions are very polarizing. All of them depend at a certain point of reducing the number of level up creatures. I don't really think there's a way around that unless you want to keep this power level and consistency. So even though I said in the end I wasn't going to suggest it, I guess in the end I'm going to suggest it. The Ikiral, the Outrider, is a perfect example of a creature that is immensely cool. I love the Outrider. This is very, like, this art, this card, it resonates with me quite a bit. However, it is not going to win you games. And any mana and effort you put into this card is going to feel like mana and effort you should have put somewhere else. find the level up creatures you want to play with, make that list, and then we'll talk again. In fact, if you make that list and send me the list, we can talk about, because I do build decks for viewers, if you were interested in that, we can go that direction as well. But I've spoken enough of Level Up. Thank you so much, Banana Sensei, for sending this deck. I know I've been kind of hard on it and Level Up, but I truly do like it, and I'm really interested in the direction it will go. I think at this moment, it exists in a weird liminal space. I think either we have to have that discussion on which ones to keep, or we need to generally reduce the power level and have a more consistent experience as if we're building it as a pre-con, if that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope this video was helpful, and I'm excited to see what the next draft of the deck is, so good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.